try and present to people, to farmers, to anyone working in the farming industry, one of the alternative methodologies to what has been the traditional accepted way of looking after the farm and growing more grass. And that is obviously through the foliar fertilisation or foliar feeding the farm. We wanted to really bring together some of the companies that we know and work with and have worked with over time to present a holistic, if you like, complete circle of information for people. So it wasn't just about Tau and Fert. No system or farm is just about one particular thing or another. There is a bunch of stuff that goes into farming to grow the grass that you need to feed your animals. We wanted to bring the companies that we felt were sort of on the cutting edge of it and starting to really work in the space that we work in with Tau and Fert. So what you see here today and the companies we've partnered with for these particular field days, every product is compatible with a Tau and Fert. In either it will go through a Tau and Fert, or in the case of TrackMap, it can be used with a Tau and Fert. One of the great things about the opportunities ahead of us as a farming community, and I was about to say farmers, but I'm not a farmer and I'll never attest to being a farmer, but I'm part of the community, I suppose, is that there are options available. As much as some of the bigger companies don't want to admit it, the opportunities for farmers to run better businesses, to grow more grass, healthier animals, healthier soils, all of that are numerous. Cutting through the information can be difficult. So today is about that. It is about finding some information that might resonate for you. We have, or Rudy has organised for Joel Williams to be here at about 2 o'clock for a presentation on foliar feeding. And now Joel is a well-known soil biologist or soil consultant, educator, scientist. He is based in Canada. He's a bit of an international man of mystery in some ways because he doesn't actually list specifically where he would be from, but he has studied in the UK, he has studied in Australia, he's presented all over the world. He's a knowledgeable man, and he is held in very high regard by the farming and scientific and soil community anyway. He will be presenting at about 2 o'clock, like I say. If we get there a bit earlier, he will hopefully jump into it earlier. Up until then, we're going to get each of our attending companies today to just give us a little bit of insight into what it is they do and how they fit into a foliar system, obviously based around the Tau and Fert today. As I mentioned, each of the products is compatible with the Tau and Fert system. Throughout the week, we've brought in a bunch of different companies to partner with us. At each section of the island, we've sort of brought in different companies dependent on where they are, because companies do work in different areas of the country, obviously. So today's ones are all local. They're all companies that are here as a part of that foliar feeding the farm system. I want to say a big thank you to Rudy. He is the one that has basically organised most of today. He's certainly put the effort in, so it's really appreciated that you guys have put the effort in. So we will start off with our presentations by moving over to TrackMap. And Marty, if you want to come up here and just give us an overview of Tau and Fert, TrackMap. You can do both.
Thanks, Julian. Hey, it's great to see a good turnout here today. So my name's Marty Orange, and I representing TrackMap today. I'm actually from the North Island, but yeah, we've got a fair bit to do with Tau and Fert and sort of how we fit in to the Tau and Fert foliar feeding around. So you're going to hear from some of the guys around the science of it and what you can put in and the savings. But for us, our side of it is around efficiencies in guidance. So we've got TrackMap, a TML that you can put in your tractor, your truck, whatever you're running it in, to give you guidance. So you're not overlapping and you're not missing and causing striping. And then we've also got TrackMap Online, which is our online side where we do the reporting. So as dairy farmers, the way regulations are going and more compliance side of it, TrackMap is a tool that can be used to keep a record of where you're putting it on. It's also good. A lot of guys have talked about trial and error with the Tau and Fert systems, learning learning what works and what doesn't work, and testing what's happening. And one of the cool things about TrackMap is that you can you can record what you've done. So if you're gonna do 2 different plots and 2 different brews, you've got a record of where you put that on and what dates you put it on and things like that. So for those of you that don't know about TrackMap, we were started by a guy, Colin Brown, based in Mosgiel. He was Young Farmer of the Year. It was out of the need in the fur industry for guidance and for proof of placement. So he pulled apart a fish finder, put it together, made it into a guidance system, and then from there we've sort of grown into a full job management system. We're in 80% of the planes and helicopters that spray and Fert. We're in ag trucks, spray trucks, tractors, all sorts now. We have a full job management system. So as a contractor, so if you're if you're one of Rudy's customers, you can have a TrackMap online account. You can send the job, pick the paddocks, tell them what you want to put on, send it to Rudy. Rudy can send that to his guys in the tractor. They know exactly where they're going on your farm. You don't have to meet them, give them that piece of paper, highlight where it is, or do the old, I remember when I was farming, you go, so this is the race here, and you're just going to go, there's some pines there, and then you go left there. So all the data's in one place. They go to the right paddock, they do the job, they bugger off to the next job, and we have an integration with Xero, so you can actually do your invoicing and things like that. So it's about streamlining your business, being more efficient, but for you as a customer as well, or for a farmer, the data that you need to show where you've put it on, or just so you know what you've done, and you're not, spreading the same paddock or going, crap, did we do that paddock last round or not? All the data's in one place. So it's a really great tool. We've got a video here, so we'll just play this. This is one of our customers who's running time Ferts on a couple of Land Cruisers up in New Plymouth. So if we just play that video, it does a better job at explaining it than me.
Sending the proof of placement and invoice. It's as simple as going onto TrackMap, sending the proof of placement in an email. All the farmers can have access to the TrackMap online and look at it themselves. Another thing is, if I give the farmer access to TrackMap online, they can go through and select each paddock they want me to spray, and then I don't have to create anything. They just send it to me and my boy hops in, and they can literally look on the TrackMap and see what paddock they've highlighted, so we're not going to ever spray the wrong paddock.
So that's a bit of a brief sort of how Jade's using it. So for contractors, a really great tool to make sure you go into the right paddocks. It saves you time. I know, when you're going to jobs, the cost of fuel and things like that. Oh. Just doing a bit of advertising with someone else. So it's about saving time, but for a farmer as well. So what it means, we have a farmer unit as well. So if you're a farmer and you're using the time Fert system in your farm, you can use TrackMap to give you guidance and to give you proof of placement for the same thing. And the same idea there that Jade talked about, if you've got staff doing the jobs for you, you can send them the paddocks, know that they're doing the right paddocks, know they're putting the right products on. You could be out on the boat and you could know that they're doing the right job, and you get that proof of placement. So yeah, if you want to know anything more about it, or if you are a TrackMap customer and you want to know a bit more about maybe how you can utilize TrackMap online a bit better, come and have a chat to me. I'll be around for the day anyway.
Good stuff. All right, thanks, Marty. Right, so one of the companies that wasn't able to be here today that has been with us all week is Fert. So I'll just do a little bit of a brief outline on Fert before we get into those that are here. Fert, what we've tried to do, as I mentioned, is capture a variety of providers to give everybody an idea of the sorts of products that they can use on the farm. So Fert were our sort of more traditional chemical-based fertiliser company. They provide ultrafine particle products. Now, ultrafine particle products, for those of you who don't know, and I'm assuming that there is nobody here that doesn't know, are obviously the very finely ground fertilisers that can be used through a Fert. Basically, anything under 100 microns will go through a Fert. There is a bit of management to learn in terms of doing that, but once you get underway, you'll quickly learn how efficient that can be. And Fert are a significant provider of that little and often idea, putting it on little and often across the farm as a paddock needs it, when it needs it, with what it needs. So they weren't able to be here today, but those who are here today, we'll start with one of our local companies. That would be Malcolm from Southern Humates. So Malcolm, do you want to come up here, please?
Thank you. We're based in Wyndham, and we started producing humates 12 years ago. And to be fair, it wasn't that easy because we were pushing snake oil and fairy dust and all sorts of things. But the first question we'd get from a consultant or a farmer was, where's your science? So we've spent these last 12 years doing scientific trials, and I won't bore you with all the figures, but they're certainly very interesting as you put humate with fertiliser or humate on its own, but mostly it goes on with fertiliser and it chelates and it holds on to those nutrients. So that's been tremendously encouraging, and we have certainly been appreciative of Fert because we're sending heaps to Canterbury especially in 20 kg bags, and that's the ideal situation for mixing. So I won't bore you with any more, but we are based in Wyndham, and if you want to see any more, get on the website or take a brochure, and it will tell you all about us. So thank you.
Thanks, Malcolm. And as I said, we're here to sort of provide a variety of information on a variety of different systems and products. There are many out there. Biostimulants is something you've probably heard about, and there are various different options out there, but the one that we've brought along today, and who's been with us for the last couple of days as well, is Magnify. So Scott, if you want to pop on up here and give us an overview of how Magnify biostimulants work.
Thank you. Is that going? Oh, just now. I used to work for Mainland Minerals about 30 years ago. I measured about 30 to 40 different grass plots in the North Island. Those days it was sort of one application a year. So we'd be up against usually 70 kilos of a mixed blend versus 400 kilos of solid. And 85% of the time the fine particle system worked. Back then it was called suspension fertilizer, so it's been around a long time. It's been in Europe for about 60 years. The next stage, though, it was changed now, and there's a lot more applications going on thanks to the likes of Fert, and so I've been using their name for a very long time. And one of my first things is, have you got access to a Fert machine? They just haven't known about it. And was how could we take another step? And that was looking at, we dealt with some soil biology back then, and through my life taking different directions, I started looking at what we could do with soil biology to magnify things. In those days we were called BioHelp. We recently rebranded last year. It's been an amazing journey of learning. Soil microbiology, there's 10 million different bacteria in our soils and 1 million different fungi. We need to make sure that most of those are useless. So there's about 30 billion worldwide that we know of now, which is 1,000-fold more than when I first started, thanks to DNA testing. So it's an area of learning, and I think long-term, probably the way much more prevalent long-term. So an idea of some of the things that we were largely a fix-it company. When people were in trouble and couldn't make any further answers, we would get a call. So we had a different kind of a client base. We're just starting to get into people now which have actually got a budget to work with. So that wasn't really our main line of business in the past. It's been amazing what we can fix and amazing what we can transform. I'm a measurer. I've measured and taken these kind of products to areas where we didn't think they would work. Everything needs some kind of nutrient to grow from, and if you can't generate that fast enough for modern times, we have to supply it. So our role is to take what people put on now and to magnify that. So if somebody wants to put on 50 kilos of nitrogen, we want to magnify that to produce, as an example, maybe the same as 200 units of nitrogen. But we have people today who want to put on 190 units. And to give you an idea of the latest products, in terms of the things that can happen, last year we had 3 different people measuring. There were different rates of nitrogen. Some was liquid nitrogen at 150, one was solid at 160. With 46 kilos less nitrogen, we were able to grow another 20 to 30 kilos a day. This year, through the winter last year, it was 20 kilos a day versus 5 on the untreated side. This year in winter, just before I came down here, we've been growing at 56 a day. And it's pushed out at times to an extra 40 kilos a day. So that person's used 190 kilos of nitrogen. We've never been in that bracket before. There's some good products around. It's great to see some great products, the fish and the humates coming in. And we can be added and mixed with those to try to enhance those, or if you like those things on their own, then there's options for people now. So ours is about transforming nature, ultimately with nitrogen fixation, soil temperature changes through different kinds of bacteria, yeast breakdowns, all those kind of things are all a part of it. So we're in a difficult field, so we have educational videos on our website to try to help people. I've also done educational videos in the past trying to get the message across for the last 30 years. Some of you here have seen those. They were an hour and a half of me, probably pretty boring, but when it's $3,000 a minute to have them professionally produced and you got an hour and a half to say, it's going to have to be me. So, thank you.
Oh, I've just noticed Joel's jumped in, so welcome, Joel. So one of the things that we get asked quite frequently as we pop around and visit farms, and I know Mike certainly gets this question quite a lot, and certainly at the field days we normally get offered this question once or twice, and that is, where's the science? Show that you can prove it. Well, we've partnered with 4 different soil scientists / consultants / biologists / agronomists this week. You can pick any one for which one they'll call themselves. They all call themselves something different. But really the point is that there is plenty of science out there to prove the concept of what we're talking about and what we have been talking about for a very long time now. You've just got to look for it. You've got to look beyond the shores of New Zealand in particular to find it. But we have some fantastic scientists and consultants here in New Zealand, 3 of which we've partnered with this week from slightly north of here. But then a guy like Joel, who is obviously overseas at the moment. There is information out there. Discerning that information can be tricky for sure. Right, so next on our list is a company that, if you have been listening to our podcast, Fert Focus, we featured firstly through Georgie Galloway's podcast on wintering her farm. She's a big proponent of the fish product. We also spoke to Richard Dyack, the general manager of Fish at the time, and it's great to have them here today. So I will hand over to, they're scattered around the room, so I don't know who I'm handing over to, but one of you or both of you. Okay, come on up, guys.
Cheers, Jolan. So I'm Dave Nation from Fish It, and in the room today we've got Richard Dyack over here, who's our General Manager based here in Southland, and Sean Tui over there, who I'll hand the microphone over to in just a minute. Before I do that, though, I thought we might have a little bit of fun. We've got a 3 VSA books over there written by Graham Shepherd. So these books are really good practical guides that help you to actually visually assess your soil, dig a few holes and work out what you've got underneath the grass. So they're really nice tools that you can put into the use practically on the farm. So I think Scott already alluded to a lot of the answers in his earlier presentation. So Scott's made this really easy for you. But I've got a jar here. The first 3 people that can tell me what's in this jar will get one of these books. Salmon. No, there's actually no salmon in this jar. This is from Oamaru, this jar, under a fence line. So that gives you a bit of a clue. Any ideas? It's not money. Well, it probably is money. Dirt, soil, bacteria. Who said that? Yep, give that man a book. Graham needs a book, I think. We got one more book. Fungi. Perfect. All right, thanks guys. I hope you enjoy those books and put them into practice. They're really, really useful guides. So from a fish it point of view, fish it is the feed source, I guess, for that fungi and bacteria in your soil. And Sean's going to go into a little bit more detail around that in a second, but before we do that, we just wanted to give you a bit of a background in our operation. We are a born and raised company in Southland with national reach. So Fish It's been around for 5 or 6 years, and this region has been crucial to us because it's been our test ground, if you like. And I know there's quite a few people in the audience who have been using Fish It for 3 or 4 years with great success. So it's great to see you all here today. But I guess to give you some roots of our business, it's a pretty interesting business in that it was founded by a guy who looked at his farm and saw that things weren't quite right on his own property and thought there must be a better way to grow his plants, basically. And he did a bit of research and he found that salmon could potentially be the answer to that. And living here in Southland, he knew there was a big problem with waste salmon from out at Stewart Island, from the Sanfords farms out there. So he went out there and he got hold of some of that salmon himself. He brought it back to his farm and unbelievably strained that himself through muslin cloths. His wife probably didn't like him very much after that because he probably smelt quite bad for quite some time. But he applied that to his property, and what he got from that was growth. He got clover and he got a different looking pasture. So from that, he realised that there was something bigger at play here. And he realised that he could actually do that and turn that into a fish hydrolysate and market that to farmers to help, I guess, solve some of the challenges that farmers are facing right now with some of the regulatory changes that are going on that are challenging for everyone. So from there, we've really grown from there. And thanks to some really good results here in Southland, we're starting to kick into the North Island. Got lots of inquiry now in the Waikato and Taranaki. And we've got some really good success stories. So I just want to pass you over to Sean, who's going to come up here and talk a little bit more about what Fish It actually does. Is that right, mate?
I think so. Thank you. So at Fish It, I guess we talk and think and dream a lot about soil fertility. It's on our minds a lot. And it's an interesting word because, the soil fertility that's happening under the ground is actually the antidote to the soil fertiliser that we've been traditionally putting above the ground. It's important to say too that it's no silver bullet. So we feed the bacteria, we feed the fungi, we promote an ecosystem under the ground that does the nutrient cycling and creates that nitrogen store that the plant uptakes naturally. But it's not a silver bullet. You need to have good soil structure, you need to have aerated soil. Like us humans, the bacteria need oxygen, and you need the right mineral and nutrient balance in your soil as well. So there is a multi-pronged approach to this. And to that end, what we do at Fish It, is we're partnering up with a lot of organisations all over New Zealand that have that expertise, because ultimately we have a product, but there are soil scientists and agronomists out there that know how to talk to yourselves as farmers and help you with your unique, your unique circumstances. So can I just get a show of hands in the room? Anyone who's either using Fish It on their farm, or is applying it to farms that they're contracting to. Quick show of hands. Got one there, got a few there. So these people with their hands up, keep your hands up for just 1 second. I would encourage you to go and find these people afterwards and have a chat to them, because they're using the product. We can talk about the product, but talk to the people who are actually using the product. When I look at this jar of soil, I see a potential to have the greatest source of on-farm water storage that you can have on your farm. When I look at this jar of soil, I see the potential to have an ecosystem that's going on under the ground that basically enables you to take a lower point of reliance on the blue and green. So, use it more as a tool than a drug. And I guess when I look at this soil, and particularly when I talk to our customers that have been on the journey for 1 or multiple years, and this is absolutely factual, I know that what I see is the potential for farmers to sleep better at night. So with that, I'll hand back to Jolyn, but come and talk to us afterwards.
Thank you. Okay, so next on our list is Michael Smith, our sales manager at Fert. Now, a lot of you will know Michael. He's a dairy farmer for a significant amount of time. He's also the very first contractor down here with Fert in the south. And he did that for 5 years. So Michael has a lot of experience around farming, but also obviously around the Fert operation. So Michael, I'll ask you to come on up here and just give us an overview of the sort of things you've done and seen from when you changed over to the Fert.
Thanks everyone for coming along. Yep, as Jolene said, Michael Smith, farmed Riversdale, Northern Southland for 8 years. Started contracting with Fert, did that for 5 years. Sold up the Fert, went back to Taranaki, and Jade that you watched before is actually my son, so both my sons contract with Fert's now in Taranaki. Bit about our own farm, Northern Southland. We milked 800 cows, 306 hectares. Fert, so granular system, we did 285,000 milk solids. Over a 3-year period, we saved $175,000 in direct costs, not all fertiliser costs, but direct costs through using the Fert. Produced 100,000 more milk solids, wintered all our cows at home, which we used to winter off, and cut 1,000 bales of silage on farm, which we used to buy in. So that's just a bit of a background of what we did. From that, when I went out contracting, did over 70 to 100 trials I've done now. Different things, proving different things, helping farmers improve their system. So there's not a lot I haven't done. So if you've got any questions, come and grab me afterwards.
Good stuff. Thanks, Mike. Right, one of the things that's really important to us at Fert is we know that people are doing different things with our machine. Our machine's just a tool to put on what it is you particularly want. So it's great to see that we've got a good group of people here, but one of the things we also enjoy supporting is our contractors. So today it's great to see Scott Watson and John Breach, who are also contractors from the local area here. And Rudy, obviously, who's put this event on largely for us as well. It's about sharing information. We can all do better when we share information. And it's less about competition and more about actually growing a system that is sustainable for everybody. And there are multitudes of ways to do that, but unfortunately, most of the time they get suppressed by the bigger players. But right now, it is time for Rudy to get up here and to give us his presentation. Now, Rudy's done a heck of a lot to get today sorted. So, Rudy, again, I just say thank you to you for that. It's been an absolute pleasure, and it's great to see the turnout here. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, Jolyon. Won't keep you waiting much longer, Joel. I see you're still a bit sleepy. We dragged you out of bed this morning. Less, more often seems to be a common phrase these days. And my question is, does it work? Yeah, welcome everybody. My name is Rudy Woutersen, and I'm a great fan of Tau and Fert. I think they're a fantastic machine. And yeah, we don't do anything else but Tau and Ferting. So me and my partner Yolanda, we are the owners of J Agri spray, and we've been dairy farming for the last 20 years or so, and until we hung up our gumboots and traded it in for a Tau and Fert about 4 years ago, and we haven't looked back since. We now operate 3 Tau and Ferts right throughout Southland, and I guess I've always looked for alternative ways of doing things, and Tau and Fert certainly fitted my way of thinking in regards to applying fertilizer. Especially when I realized that we could apply less fertilizer and save lots of money. I am Dutch after all. So I'm always questioning myself how to do things more efficient and more cost effective. So my question to you is, why did you guys come out here today? You know, is it about the looming regulations, you know, the rising cost of fertilizers, environment, you know? So what if we could farm with applying 50% less fertilizer and maintaining same stocking rate, maintaining the same grass growth, and maintaining fertility? Now everybody would be keen on that, right? I believe we can achieve this, and I'll try and explain why I think that. When you apply normal phosphate fertilizers in a traditional way, let's say once or twice a year, piling it on, research indicates that you only utilize around 50% of your phosphate applied. The balance of that is lost. It's either lost through runoff, leaching, it gets locked up in the soil, it just disappears, it's just gone, never see it again. And the same goes for nitrogen, potash, sulfur, and most other nutrients. But we are so used to applying fertilizer that way, it's hard to change. You know, we've always done it this way. Or this is what my fertilizer rep recommended, so we just put it on. So yeah, that's what we hear all the time. It's a bit like buying a ton of fertilizer and then put half of that in your Fert spreader and dumping the rest down the drain. So over the last few years, we developed a mix, and we called it LMO 16. So it's less more often, and it's got 16 different nutrients in the mix. And we're all using traditional fertilizers in that mix. And we can mix that with either fish, humates, soil conditioners, or you know, Magni-Grow, or any of those products. The LMO 16 has all the nutrients that a plant needs to grow, and we basically follow the cows with that instead of urea. We feed the soil what it needs when it needs it. The results have been very promising. We've been doing some herbage samples and soil samples over the last year, and we set up all the results there on the table at the entrance there. Just have a look. If you get some time later on, just have a look at it and see what you think and let me know. So what actually holds you back taking that first step to try and farm with less fertilizer? You know, are you worried about not growing enough grass? Are you worried about, you know, not getting the production, or are you worried about losing fertility? You see, all those things we can measure. We can measure grass growth. You can measure, you know, you can keep an eye on your production, and we can do samples and make sure that we monitor whatever is going on the farm. So basically, at the end of the day, it is a big challenge to take that first step. But once you've taken that first step, let us show you that less can be more. And with that, well, I guess just to come and have a yarn to us afterwards and see how we can help you with your next step in this venture. So yeah, thank you very much. And
Thank you, Rudy. The testing and measuring side of things we haven't really touched on yet this morning, but it is such an important component of what you do. And one of the best ways to do that is through the use of a contractor. And I know that was a big focus for Mike when he was down here. One thing he didn't say, I don't think, today was that he used to say to the farmer when they wanted to try something, well, you supply the product, I'll supply the machine, let's go do it and see what happens. Of those 100 trials he mentioned, that's how he approached it. Testing and measuring is important because that way you test your own theories. That comes back to the science side of it as well. Observation is as scientific often as the lab tests. It can be all you need to decide on what is good for your farm. You've obviously got to check it. You've got to make sure that it's giving you what you need, but also not doing any damage to anything around the place. But often that is the best way of moving forward. Now, we are absolutely thrilled to have Joel with us. Welcome, Joel. Thank you for being here today. Now, Joel, I came across Joel as a result of Rudy actually posting a link to a particular presentation that he was giving for another company. I believe it might have been an Australian company, actually. And from there, Rudy has engaged Joel to work with him and Yolanda at J Agri. And from there, I've been able to also sort of listen to some of Joel's talks and hear what he has to say. So, Joel, welcome. I trust you can hear me. Can we hear you? Can we turn that up a little bit? You might need to speak a little louder, Joel, I'm sorry. Okay. Everyone hear that? Okay, we'll hand over to Joel. Thank you very much, everyone.
Of nitrogen is actually most beneficial. It's not ideal to kind of just feed plants just one or the other. It's actually a little bit of them all is where we see optimum plant growth. But that said, there's always a little bit of nuance to this discussion. And here what we're looking at is just comparing, for example, ammonium and nitrate. And what we're pointing out is that when the plant takes up either ammonium or nitrate, again, the end point is to form that amino acids and then onwards to the protein. And if we start here just looking at ammonium, for example, when ammonium comes into the root and into the plant, you can see that there's actually just one single step. There's a special enzyme that converts ammonium ultimately into glutamine, which is the very first amino acid. So you can see it's a very short pathway to get from ammonium to glutamine, and again we require manganese and magnesium in order to facilitate that process. Now if we were to compare nitrate, for example, you can see that when nitrate enters the plant, it has to go through a lot more steps in the chain, a lot more processing for it to ultimately form also glutamine, this very first amino acid, which then ultimately can become lots of other amino acids and become protein. You can see that there's lots of steps here. And again, there's lots of nutrients that are required in order to help facilitate these various steps. And the take-home message here is really simply that you can see that one, i.e. ammonium has a very short metabolic pathway, nitrate has a very long metabolic pathway, and that simply means that when we feed the plant nitrate or an excess of nitrate, for example, that's actually a big energetic drain on the plant. The plant actually expends a lot of energy to shuttle that nitrate through these various steps of the pathway. So if we would talk about energy efficiency, indeed nitrate is actually the least efficient form of nitrogen to deliver to plants because it creates such a drawdown or a drain on energy reserves to build all of these specialist enzymes that shuttle along this process. So that's just kind of one nuance to this discussion. And just to point out that, actually let me come back here for a second, although urea is also kind of further back in the chain and it also has to become first ammonium before it can go onwards, urea is a little bit of a special case, a special example, which is, again, we don't necessarily have time to go into all of the detail, but in a nutshell, urea is a bit of a special case because it has this carbon embedded within it. And that means that actually urea has some real efficiency gains or efficiency benefits to it as well when we get the urea in the plant as urea, because that carbon embedded in within that urea molecule is very advantageous. It means that actually we are saving the plant on photosynthesis, on breathing, excuse me, breathing in carbon from the atmosphere. We're saving that energy on that process because we have carbon already embedded within the nitrogen molecule. So urea is also a very efficient form for this special reason that it has some carbon embedded, whereas nitrate, it needs to draw carbon from photosynthesis. Ammonium needs to draw carbon from photosynthesis, so that becomes a bit of a drain as well. So urea is a bit of an special example there. Now, one of the key messages to take home is that we must transition our thinking also away from this simplistic idea that plants only or predominantly use inorganic forms of nitrogen. We're so tunnel vision into how we manage nitrate or ammonium, artificial, these inorganic forms of nitrogen. And in fact, what we see in reality is that plants can actually use a much wider range of nitrogen sources for plant growth, for plant metabolism. So beyond those inorganic forms that we also just talked about, plants can indeed take up directly from the soil and even through their leaves amino acids. So these are already organic forms of nitrogen. Amino acids or little chains of amino acids called peptides, or even longer chains, proteins. Indeed, the plant can take up these larger, more kind of macro molecules directly for plant nutrition. And it, of course, extends even beyond that, where I'm sure some of you have come across this idea of rhizophagy, where plants can indeed also even engulf whole bacteria through their roots and actually extract nutrients out of the bacteria by almost consuming them, eating them in some regards. So indeed, plants can take up these more complex forms of nutrients, bacteria, for example, but even these organic forms that you see in the middle. And indeed, these are very valuable sources of nutrition, especially nitrogen, but even beyond that, all of nutrition. So the key message here is we must transition our thinking away from this narrow view of inorganic forms and look at it much more holistically. And yes, the inorganic forms are important, of course they are, but so are the organic forms, and so are the role of even bacteria to supply nutrients. So this is kind of one of the key messages. And the reason that I emphasize this, and particularly we want to share an example here about these organic forms, the amino acids and proteins, is that these also are very efficient forms of nitrogen. And just a reminder that when the plant takes up nitrate or urea or ammonium, it doesn't want those. Those are just building blocks. At the end of the day, what it really wants is the protein. It wants these organic forms. So just a reminder on that. So therefore, and this is kind of the point why I labor on this, when the plant takes up those inorganic forms, it doesn't, again, want ammonium per se. It actually wants the protein. So it will expend energy to turn that ammonium into that amino acid, as we saw in that pathway earlier. And then again, stitching those aminos together, and again, stitching those together to form the proteins. Each step, where I've got these red arrows here, each step along this chain is a metabolic cost, is an energetic cost. It costs the plant to build amino acids. It costs the plant to build these peptides. It costs the plant to build those proteins. So the obvious question is, well, what would happen if we then simply fed the plant directly these organic forms of nitrogen? What if we just give the plant amino acids? What if we just give the plant proteins? Well, we are saving energy. We are saving metabolic energy. The plant doesn't have to waste energy converting this ammonium or nitrate, for example, into these organic forms. We can just deliver these organic forms directly into the plant, thereby saving energy and thereby adding to the efficiency of the form of nitrogen that we use. And I'll just say that there's actually a lot of really fascinating research into the contribution of amino acids and organic forms of nitrogen underway at the moment. It has been a neglected part of plant nutrition in recent decades, and there's a handful of really interesting papers that are re-digging into this and exploring the nuance of this conversation, which is kind of what I'm just trying to summarize in a nutshell, that it's all about the efficiency gain that comes with these organic forms that have carbon embedded within them, and that are further up the metabolic pathway. So this is called metabolic shortcutting. We're shortcutting this pathway and delivering the most efficient forms at the top end. Now, this is also really important because these organic forms, like proteins or amino acids, which have carbon embedded within them, they're also more stable in the environment. They're less reactive. You all know that nitrogen has a bad reputation for a good reason. Nitrates are highly leachable. Ammonium and urea can convert to ammonia gas and volatilize off into the air. Nitrogen, inorganic nitrogen, is very reactive, and therefore easily lost from the system. And you're all very aware of this. I know it's also a big problem in parts of New Zealand, but of course it's a big problem all around the world. Here we're looking at nitrate leaching specifically. And sure, you can see that there are a particular handful of hotspots. Parts of Asia, Western Europe, and North America arguably are some of the hotspots of nitrate leaching. And so you can see that nitrogen is very reactive and it escapes into the ecosystem very easily. And the point is here that we love to therefore give nitrogen a bad name, but there's nuance to this discussion. It is the inorganic forms that are more reactive. The organic forms are not so leachable. They are not so volatilizable. They do not behave quite the same. And so it's this nuance around, well, what form of nitrogen are we talking about? That is a really important piece of the puzzle when we talk about the reactivity of nitrogen, but it's also a really important piece of the puzzle when we talk about plant nutrition, plant metabolism, and the energy efficiency that comes with those organic forms. So this is really important, though. You're all aware that nitrogen in the ecosystem is a big concern globally. It's a hot topic within agricultural circles. And the concern is somewhat this concern about the negative effects of nitrogen on soil health, on soil function, on soil quality. And we do have, and again, I just picking some examples here, it's not a blanket rule that says, you know, nitrogen is always bad. It is always disruptive. You know, small amounts of nitrogen or optimum rates of nitrogen can be very beneficial for productivity and therefore also beneficial for soil health. It's when we over-apply nitrogen that it particularly becomes problematic. But just to share a handful of examples with you why we should be concerned about excess nitrogen building up, not just within ecosystems, but within our own fields, within our own soils, and how that can also undermine the very productivity that we're all trying to manage. So here we have a fascinating study out of the UK. Plant microbe networks are weakened by long-term fertilization. So this was from the Broadbook trial, which has been at Rothamsted going for over 100 years. So you can see here, we're looking at the effects of century-long fertilization on the networks between plants and soil microbial functions. And their results show that both plant and soil microbe have a consistent response to long-term fertilization, whereby both richness and diversity of both plants and microbes are significantly decreased. So we're losing diversity as nitrogen is enriched within the environment. And we also see a compromising of certain key microbial genes that are responsible for carbon, nitrogen, or phosphorus cycling, for example. So the results indicate this century-long fertilization that ultimately weakens these plant microbe networks. And here you can see our control or unfertilized. Here we're looking at plant species diversity in the grassland. And you can see we have much greater plant species diversity in our control, but where we begin to fertilize, of course, the grasses begin to dominate. We have lost some element of plant species diversity, and that can come with some negative consequences. Here's another study looking at the effects of nitrogen fertilization, 35 years of fertilization on diazotrophs, or the group of nitrogen-fixing bacteria. And as you all know, if we enrich the soil with nitrogen, we know that legumes and the rhizobium will not fix nitrogen if there's too much enrichment. And it is also the same of a lot of the free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria. These are the diazotropes. And we can see that here it was found that nitrogen fixation was drastically reduced, dropped by 50% after almost 4 decades of fertilization. Our work suggests that long-term fertilization might have selected against nitrogen fixation and against the specific group of nitrogen-fixing bacteria. Now, of course, this is free nitrogen. This is the exact process that you do not want to undermine. You want to optimize nitrogen fixation. You want to get as much free nitrogen from the atmosphere as possible. And indeed, the process of nitrogen fertilization undermines this exact process, which we can tap into in order to optimize the bank balance and get some free nitrogen and save on fertilizer costs. So again, just sharing some examples whereby we should be concerned with this. And last one here, again, I share this one just to show the nuance in this picture, to say that it's not always bad, or not always that nitrogen is bad. It can be beneficial in the system at times. It just kind of depends on the context. But here we have a study looking at, this was a meta-analysis, so a study that's reviewing lots of other studies and summarizing the data into an overall trend. And you can see, as the title suggests, mineral nitrogen input decreases microbial biomass in soils under grasslands, but not under annual crops. So they studied the effects of nitrogen fertilizer on soil biology, on soil microorganisms, and the nitrogen input decreased microbial biomass by 12% in grasslands, and this negative effect in grasslands was likely due to the reduction in plant species richness. And we saw that from the other Rothamsted study earlier, that plant species declines, and that therefore could have some spillover negative effects on the soil biology. However, in annual cropping systems, that mineral nitrogen actually increased soil microbial biomass. And the mechanism here was likely due to higher crop residue being integrated into the soil, therefore more food in the soil, and therefore an increase of microbial functionality and microbial biomass. So, okay, I share that just to highlight there's sometimes nuance in the picture, but in this instance, okay, in a grassland situation, the evidence suggests that that the fertilizer can indeed have a negative effect on the soil biology. And of course, as you all know, soil biology is a very hot topic at the moment, and a lot of interest and traction in optimizing this. So in summary of this section, now we're going to talk just a few quick slides on foliars to wrap up. I really like this image. It summarizes the concept really nicely. Think of this as a balance of the scales here, in some kind of a balance. If we are tipped too heavily towards inorganic nitrogen, what does inorganic nitrogen do? Those inorganic forms, indeed, they actually encourage more shoot growth, above growth, at the compromise of root growth. And so if we have more shoots but less roots, that can lead to smaller root systems which can't grab onto and hold onto the nitrogen that we apply. So often we see more nitrogen leaching because of the smaller root systems. And of course, we see more nitrogen leaching when we use more of those inorganic forms, which are more reactive, more leachable, more volatilizable, etc. So this, when we tip the scales too much in this direction towards inorganic nitrogen use, ultimately this leads to a more of a mining or a burning of the soil organic matter. And of course, as you all know, soil organic matter could be considered a bit of a master variable of soil health. So if we are undermining soil carbon, of course, this is going to lead to a compromise in soil health over time. Now, on the other hand, if we are focusing on more of the organic forms of nitrogen and have these cycling within the system, well, those organic forms of nitrogen, they actually encourage more microbial associations with roots. Organic forms of nitrogen encourage more root biomass versus shoot biomass. So we get bigger root systems, we get stronger microbial associations. And ultimately, if we steer it in this direction where we are encouraging and supporting the soil microbial biomass and supporting soil biology, ultimately this leads to greater soil organic matter stabilization, not burning it off, but actually forming soil organic matter, stabilizing soil organic matter, therefore leading to a more sustainable production system. So I think this summarizes it really nicely. We just need to strike a bit of a better balance. And when I refer to organic forms of nitrogen, I'm talking about things like composts and manures, biochar or biosalts and biosolids. It could be other foliar type products, fish hydrolysates, protein hydrolysates, plant extracts, any of these kinds of forms of nitrogen that also have carbon embedded within them. It's all about having nitrogen attached to carbon, embedded with carbon, and then that makes the nitrogen more stable, less reactive, and more favorable for soil function. So foliars therefore plug into this story for the very simple reason that when we use a foliar nutrition approach, but especially a foliar nitrogen approach, the more nitrogen we can get into the plants through the foliage means that we have the opportunity to put less down in the soil. And the less, as I've just kind of shared with you, the less nitrogen down in the soil, the better. And I think that foliar nitrogen presents a really wonderful opportunity to, strike this balance between ecosystem health and functionality and productivity. And I think that, okay, we can all agree that we want to try and dial down our fertilizer inputs. It's good for the bank balance, it's good for the ecosystem. But of course, we've got to be careful as we dial down those inputs. We don't also want to lose productivity. And that's where I think foliars can come into their own, because we can do this substitution process whereby we can cut back inputs going down into the soil, but keep them coming in through the foliage, through the foliar spray, therefore to optimize production. And there we see these benefits. Less fertilizer, less nitrogen in the soil means we're going to encourage more of that nitrogen fixation, not suppress the biology like we just heard about. We're optimizing, therefore, soil health, but we're pushing the nitrogen in through the foliar where we can therefore optimize production. So that's really one of the key benefits of foliar approach is the efficiency gains. We can bypass some of these soil issues or soil imbalances. Sometimes, as you may know, there can be nutrient antagonisms in the soil, lockups, this kind of thing. So we can bypass those. We therefore see less leaching and less volatilization when we're not putting so much, particularly nitrogen, into the soil. And it's less fertilizer required. There's a maximum amount there's a top end in which you can apply nitrogen through the foliar. Of course, that's one of the limitations of the approach. There's only so much you can apply, but you are putting in a high efficiency, a low dose, but high efficiency form of nitrogen through the foliage, of bypassing the soil imbalances and lockups and these kinds of things, and therefore obtaining an efficiency gain. So there's a real opportunity for this kind of less but more frequent approach, so kind of a spoon feeding approach, whereby we may be more regularly topping up lower doses of high efficiency applications through the foliar pathway. And that's in a nutshell, the key benefit that can kind of come from a foliar spray. Now, however, optimizing a foliar spray, a foliar approach, can be difficult. It can be variable. And I'm sure you've all had, maybe for those of you that have done it before, foliar sprays do have a bit of a mixed opinion out there. Some people don't think that they're very useful. Others have had very good success. And I think that what we must do is understand the factors that influence the uptake of the foliar spray, designing a good foliar spray, in order to limit some of that variability and optimize the response. So again, we could do a really detailed analysis on this, but just to summarize, I put it down to these 4 categories that we really must think about. Firstly, the formulation. What is it we're spraying? What's in the tank mix? How do we optimize the formulation itself? Secondly, how do we apply it? What are the application considerations, the nozzles, etc., pressure? What is the crop itself? Different crops are more or less responsive to foliars than others, or crop stage can also play a role. And what are some of the environmental factors and environmental conditions? And I'm just going to share, we'll summarize this now, but I think particularly the formulation and the environment, these two here are particularly important factors that we can tweak in order to optimize that foliar response. So I summarized this with the acronym FACE: formulation, application, crop, and environment. And really, when you're designing and going out there to apply a foliar spray, you should be thinking about all of these variables, or as many of these variables as possible. So when I say formulation, I'm talking about what goes in the tank mix, what is the concentration of the nutrients that you're applying, what is the rate per hectare, what is the form of the nutrient, what's its solubility, what is the spray pH. I think this is a really important one that people are not paying enough attention to. Most nutrients are absorbed into the foliage with under more acidic conditions. So definitely acidifying the spray solution down to around 5.5. Something like citric acid is perfect for this. Just to get a slightly more acidic nutrient mix, you'll find that the nutrients will be absorbed much more optimally. EC, the saltiness or the concentration again. Other additives like, of course, wetter stickers, adjuvants, but also carbon sources, biostimulants, molasses, fulvic humic acids, seaweeds, fish hydrolysates, these kinds of things. Some of those other bioadditives can also be very valuable in the formulation as the nitrogen or nutrient synergists. And of course, application, okay, it's your nozzles, not too fine, not too coarse, just optimizing that process and the pressure. The crop, as I mentioned, crop stage, generally younger leaves are a little more receptive to foliar sprays, and more older, mature leaves become a little less responsive. They can still absorb, but they become a little less responsive. Different plant species, as you all know, the brassicas have those very waxy leaves, so they can be very repellent to foliar spray. So you definitely want to wet a sticker in with those. So again, just some of that nuance between different species. And other stresses. I mean, if the plant is under pest or disease attack, or heat stress, or frost stress, or any other environmental stresses, of course, it's going to be less responsive to that foliar spray. And lastly, the environment. This is a really, really important one. The big factor is just optimizing the time of day or the humidity. You need good humid conditions for the foliar nutrients to be absorbed. So you want to target the foliar spray in the early morning or the late afternoon, early evening. The middle of the day is also okay if it's a cloudy day, if it's high humidity, this is also fine. But generally you want to kind of target in the early morning or late afternoon to optimize the humidity for uptake. And again, under the heat of the day, if it's a really hot day, the stomata are closed. So again, avoiding hot days, and actually even the presence of light itself can also enhance uptake. So just a few kind of images to kind of close, to wrap this up, just to illustrate this. This is a really nice image highlighting how important this humidity factor is. So two of the important pathways of the nutrient solutions passing through the leaf and getting into the leaf. One is through the waxy cuticle, and there are these kind of micropores in that waxy cuticle that, under more humid conditions, those micropores will open, and as you can see, therefore the solution will pass through. But under low humidity or dry air, those micropores are not so open, so we're not going to get as good uptake of that solution through the cuticle into the leaf. And the second one, is a really important pathway for nutrient absorption, is through the stomata. So we know that the nutrients will travel along the edges of the guard cells and in through the stomata. So of course, we want the stomata to be open, and therefore we will optimize the uptake of that process. So again, hence why high humidity, early morning, late afternoon, these are the good times to optimize the nutrient uptake through the stomata as well as through the cuticle. So that's a really important piece of the puzzle. And then just coming back to the formulation and trying to wrap this all together in relation to our discussion about inorganic versus organic forms of nitrogen, nitrogen with carbon embedded within it. this is also a key tip. Anytime you're applying any kind of fertilizer, and this is true if you're spinning out dry fertilizer, this is true if you're spraying foliars, rather than apply the nutrient on its own, combine it with a carbon source and wrap it up to stabilize the nutrient. Form a chelate or a complex, bind it up, have not just nutrient on its own, but have that nutrient embedded with carbon. So here I'm talking about, again, things like molasses, sugars, humic acids, fulvic acids, kelp, seaweed extracts, fish hydrolysates, anything with its carbon and organic based, to combine that with your foliar urea, for example, or other forms of nitrogen, just to create this carbon-nitrogen complex. This is what's also really going to enhance the uptake as a chelated nutrient, but also improve the stabilization, less losses, all of those things that we talked a little bit about at the beginning. So I think that's a key message. I think key humidity, time of day, and then in that formulation, make sure you have carbon additives and an acidic spray mix. Again, dropping that pH maybe down to around 5, 5.5, somewhere around there. Okay, so I will just give a quick shameless plug. Actually, I have in the pipeline a detailed and a very expanded and advanced course on this topic of foliar nitrogen. I already have this planned before being invited to speak to you. So it's actually going to be running in Jan-Feb next year. It will be a 4-week intensive course where we will dive deep into all these aspects of plant nutrition, nitrogen nutrition, metabolism, and then the foliar spray, designing the foliar spray, mechanisms of uptake, and then we'll look at some case studies from around the world of farmers using the strategy. So if that's of interest to you, that'll be running, as I said, early next year. Jump onto my website there and sign up to the mailing list for to be notified about that as all of those details come together. So it was basically what you heard today, but in a much deeper format with a bit more breathing space to get through the content and a lot more detail. So thanks very much. If we've got time for some questions, I'm happy to take a few quick questions if we've got time.
I think we've got time. Jolien's had to shoot off, so just asked me to help finish off the sessions. Thanks, Joel. That's been a lot of information. Has anyone got some questions? Yep, we'll have to talk into the mic so that Joel can hear you.
Yeah, hi. If the foliar spray lands on the soil, has that just made it or nullified it?
Yes and no. So it's not like that, therefore it's lost or gone from the system. Of course, it can still wash down into the soil and then be taken up through the roots. So that's perfectly fine. However, you're right in some regard. There are some negatives associated with that, yes. Once it touches the soil, it can begin to have some of those negative effects that we talked about. And in the example of urea, that's where it is a big problem, is that when you foliar spray urea, that means the urea enters the plant as urea through the leaf. But as I'm sure you all know, once you apply urea to the soil, that's where it's more prone to then being converted to either volatilized off as ammonia gas or converted into that very leachable nitrate form. So it is a bit of a problem, particularly with urea, and that's why urea is especially advantageous through the foliar pathway, is because then it enters the plant as urea, where it has that carbon embedded, where it is a very efficient form of nitrogen. So yes, you should really be trying to optimize a foliar spray, not dribble bar, not dribble nozzles down into the soil. We are talking about a more of a misting foliar spray onto the foliage.
Anyone else? Yep.
I just got a couple. Applying organic nitrogen on a wet day, is it wasted? Well, you know, more as a soil drench and a foliar application. And plus, if it's going on as a foliar application, what sort of what size droplet are you looking at for best efficiency?
Okay, Yeah, so under wet conditions, yes, you're right. It's not ideal for a foliar spray of anything, to be honest, any nutrient, because similar to the question we just had, is that if it's raining, then those nutrients are more likely to be washed off the leaf down into the soil. So I would argue that, there are some inputs where it can be very advantageous to apply in the rain, but I would say that foliar nutrition is not one of them, because you want it to pass into the leaf and not wash off down into the soil. So that's part one. And then secondly, I've completely lost your
droplet
question.
size. Around the droplet
thank you.
size, yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, okay. So that, of course, follow the somewhat standard rules. I mean, with foliar nutrition, you can get away with slightly more coarse nozzle droplets than you can, obviously, with, say, pesticides. Many of the pesticides require much more of a fine mist. Nutrients, you can use a more coarse droplet. That's also quite okay. And really, it's about also optimizing that to the weather conditions. So obviously, if it's a slightly windier day, you don't want to go too fine where the droplet will blow off into the wind, of course. But you don't necessarily want the droplet to be too coarse either, where it might just fall immediately to the soil. So that's something you, I guess, have to strike a little bit the balance of on a case-by-case scenario. But I guess I would just answer more simply by reiterating that first point there, to say that yes, with foliar nutrients, you can go a little more on the coarser side. You don't have to be too worried about using those ultra fine ones, as you often have to do with other pesticides.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Hey, thank you very much for your time, Joel. And thank you, Rudy, for setting that up. There's still a few experts in the room and guys that have been using the Fert system for a while. So like everyone said, make sure you do ask people that have used it. It's always good in anything you do, isn't it, to ask someone that's done it before you and not make their same mistakes, or just ask them what they've done. And every farming system's different, so it's not one size fits all, really, is it? So make sure you hang around and have a chat to all of us here. Once again, thanks very much. Thanks for coming along. And once again, thanks, Rudy, for setting it all up. So yeah, make sure you hang around, and I think still tea and coffee out there, is there, Rudy? So, yep. So hang around, come and say g'day to one of us, but thanks a lot for coming along.